All right. So thank you everybody for joining us. We'll get this started so we can have enough time for feedback, comments, and kind of the ongoing discussion. So Hoos, I would like to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. And thank you everyone for logging in on this webcast. We have a lot of people with us. Together we're almost with 50 people joining. So it's great to see all of you attending and to learn more about our first protocol. So the agenda for today, we'll start with a brief introduction by our CCO, Sam Holroyd. You already saw her briefly on camera just a minute ago. And then afterwards, we'll go towards the part that you all came for, I think, an introduction of the protocol and then a Q&A on the protocol. And I will talk a bit about the questions and how we're going to handle that in the presentation itself. But first, I would like to give the podium to Sam.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say welcome. We are so excited to have you here today at 06. We have worked feverishly as a team to pull together a protocol to help you as our oil and gas clients generate an opportunity to transition your future P&A liabilities into carbon credit assets. We also look forward to working with buyers to help you understand the value that the 06 platform brings by delivering accuracy, additionality, permanence, and transparency to the carbon credits generated through the 06 platform and protocol. So welcome. You'll be in the fine hands of Andre Sestak, our head of engineering, and he'll be leading the discussion, and we'll be here coming back at the end of the discussion for questions and answers. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining. Andre, to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam, for that introduction. And before we head to Andre, we'll try to make it as interactive as possible, this presentation. So Andre prepared the storyline of the protocol and walk you through it completely. But you're very much welcome to ask us questions, and you can use the chat for that. And we're using a Miro board today for the presentations, which you will see in a minute. And I will post all the questions that you have on the Miro board. We'll try to get to most of the questions immediately, but the ones we don't get to, we'll get into in the end. And if the time doesn't permit, we'll make sure to come back to you on it, and then also post our contact information so you can contact us directly. And it's also good to know that the webcast is being recorded, and we'll also post the recording of the webcast on our website, so you can always look it back later. I think I covered most of it. Maybe it's good also to know Andre is our head of engineering. Sam, that you just saw, is our chief commercial officer, CCO, and I'm a business analyst at 06. I think we've covered most of the practical stuff, so I would like to hand it over to you, Andre.
All right, thank you for that, Hoos. So we're all here gathered today for the initial release of the production reserves carbon offset protocol released by 06. We're very excited about this. There's lots of movements in the oil and gas industry, and we're always looking for ways to make it better and have a tangible impact on the climate improvement scenarios of our industry. So in this regard, our initial protocol is focused on retiring wells early and giving operators the opportunity to keep the oil in the ground in exchange for the value from the prevented carbon emissions that would result from producing those reserves, both the oil, the gas, and the NGLs. So the secret sauce of 06 is really the implementation of the protocol. This one is the first primary one, as well as future protocols. I'll be focusing on other aspects of both the oil and gas industry and other resource extraction activities, as well as potential other engineered solutions. So what is the secret really behind the 06 tool? This is a digital browser-based platform that we've developed that is based on the blockchain. And what really makes it unique is that we can post digitize separate protocols that meet high quality standards for generating carbon credits and use the platform to implement them. So when these are digitized, project operators and owners will come and use the platform and upload their supporting documentation that really shows and validates the core criteria for high quality carbon credits relevant to their individual projects. those being the permanence, the additionality, and the accuracy of the individual project. And the platform itself guarantees the fourth key element, which is transparency. When the when the supporting documentation is uploaded, we use our independent verifiers. In this case, we currently have a close partnership with Ryder Scott, which has helped us develop really the core requirements for really creating high quality permanence criteria. The supporting documentation is then digitized and uploaded to the IPFS, which is the interplanetary file system. This is a decentralized file storage mechanism that allows those files to be accessible by the public and immutably present for time going forward, as well as once the project is verified, executed, and delivered, then tokens are minted, which then keep track of all the carbon credits that are generated. And through those, they can be referenced back to the supporting documentation that is again stored on the IPFS. So this is the general outline mechanism of the 06 platform and our business model, and what we really try to bring to the energy transition and to the general improvement of the oil and gas industry, and hopefully industries, all other peripheral industries going forward as well. So when it comes to project eligibility, this is always the core considerations that when we have first discussions with potential project operators, that we really want to discuss with them and make sure that their projects are lined up to meet these high quality requirements. So obviously the core consideration, as we've seen in the voluntary carbon markets, is additionality, making sure that the imminent emissions are really going to happen and that the utilization of carbon credits is important and required to basically abate those emissions and that they wouldn't happen otherwise. So in this case, regarding oil and gas projects, the first eligibility requirement is having imminent production of hydrocarbons. The next one is verifiable supporting information. This is kind of the documents that we mentioned earlier that will be uploaded to the platform. 3 is mechanism for legal protection of retired reserves. We'll go into more detail on this a little bit further, but essentially it is protection that the retired reserves, once they're plugged and abandoned, that they will not be developed again for at least 50 years in the future. That way we can guarantee the permanence on a lasting basis. Regulatorily compliant. This is another key consideration for additionality. So making sure that the operator is in good standing with the regulators, that they have the correct permits to operate in place, that they file for correct permits to retire the wells in consideration of the regulations in their local jurisdiction, as well as that there is not existing moratoriums on the reserves or something like that coming into existence in the couple additional weeks. That kind of feeds back into the additionality and the imminent production of those hydrocarbons resulting in emissions. So business as usual production forecasts. This is the accuracy and the quantification of the emissions through the hydrocarbon production that is to be expected in the coming decades. And that really factors into the accuracy and is really managed and regulated currently by SEC and the business community in general, which has been doing this for many decades. Justification for expectation of geologic permanence. This is kind of the key component also of the permanence, basically making sure that the retired reserves in the project are not going to be migrating to a separate reservoir or offset wells and produce that way, creating leakage and reversals of the issued credits. So we believe that if the projects meet these initial eligibility criteria, there's a good chance that they'll be able to generate high quality carbon credits using our protocol and the digitized platform. So the first consideration that we mentioned obviously is additionality. There's currently existing standards that are being put together across the voluntary carbon market to really think about and put forward what are some of the key considerations in making this additionality consistent across all projects. We've looked at the existing standards out there, we've looked at other protocols, and really there's several existing tests that fall into that establish the criteria of additionality. And we've already hit on some of them. The first being the regulatory test. Is whatever project is being executed above and beyond the existing regulatory requirements for emissions, et cetera. And for the case of our protocol, presumably if the operator is in good standing and they have the required permits, then the hydrocarbon production is within regulatory compliance going forward and will reach the market. So that is not a consideration, and the test is generally passed for proved producing assets. Common practice test. This is a reasonably self-evident test, and kind of oil and gas projects do meet this, because common practice is that, as we have done for the past century and a half, we will continue to produce from oil and gas wells unless acted upon otherwise, or unless the economic conditions turn. So by requiring a SEC compliant third-party reserve report, this constrains the qualified reserves based on their economic considerations, as well as any regulatory or contractual basis that may impede the producible volumes, and really kind of dials it in to meet the common practice test. Financial barrier test. This is also kind of handled by the SEC report, basically quantifying only the economically producible reserves. And this obviously considers the operating expenses, the working interest, the royalty ownership, as well as any price differentials that might be arising from each individual operation and specific project. Hey, before we move on, we've got one question over here that's popped up. If carbon credits are granted for economically viable wells only, what additional incentives exist for operators to help offset P&A costs and lose profit? So really what we're focusing on over here is marginal wells. So really what the incentive is kind of the arbitrage between the value of the remaining reserves and the value received for the carbon credits. The current view in the market is that the carbon credit price will continue to rise as emission reduction targets loom nearer, primarily in 2023. And really the only price differential that the carbon value of the carbon credit is competing with is the profit margin. So if you're producing a barrel of oil, there's a certain cost per barrel to produce that, and then you receive a certain amount for that barrel on the market. And that profit margin is what the carbon credit has to do, because obviously the carbon credits have no operating expenses. And so the additional incentive for operators to shut in the economic wells is really making a case-by-case decision on, does this well create more value for me if I continue to produce it? If this is a new well with low operating expenses, that would be the case. But on many marginal wells where the profit margin is narrow, then perhaps there is greater value in retiring it early, offsetting those emissions and receiving that carbon value rather than continuing to operate. All right, the next key criteria that we talked about is the accuracy, which in the oil and gas industry, we're quite good at measuring what it is that we produce, as that is what we get paid on, as well as all of the things around operations, at least in the engineering side. And so when we look at the accuracy of the emission quantification within the protocol, there's really three key criteria in the life cycle of the hydrocarbons that produce emissions. There's the downstream operation, which is really the end use of the produced products. There's the refining of the produced products. And then there's the upstream emissions, which is operational emissions, as well as fugitive methane emissions that come from various operations. We know that in the oil and gas or energy transition and kind of environmental industry, there's three scopes that are considered. Scope 1, which is directly from the operations, so that would constitute fugitive methane emissions, flaring, venting, on-site combustion, operating producing facilities, etc. In this initial version of our protocol, we are focusing purely on the emissions that come from either the volumes themselves or the quality of the produced fluids. This is because there's a lot of variability in operational emissions, and this is something that will be implemented in the future as the industry standardizes on ways and systems to measure these emissions. Scope 2 is purchased energy and materials required for the production. And scope 3, as I mentioned, is the end use of the products themselves. So combustion of the gas, the oil, the NGLs, etc. Fugitive methane during transportation, and so on. And so the way we've really focused on measuring these, first we have the third-party reserve report, which, as we mentioned earlier, it's the proved developed reserves that are under consideration because those meet the high requirements for additionality. And then there's also the quality of those products being generated, which ultimately reflect the emission intensity of those. And we received those from a gas analysis report, which has information about the gas heating value, as well as the composition of any associated and natural gas liquids, and oil sales receipts or other fluid quality reports. These then feed into these 5 scopes that I mentioned earlier. We've got the intrinsic oil phase emissions, which is tied to the API gravity. And this is derived from the end products of the oil. So if there's heavier oil results in heavier products, more emission intensity. Lighter oils result in lighter components with a lot less, slightly less emission intensive products. Part of that thing tied to the API and quality of the oil is also how much energy it takes to refine the product into its individual component end use products. And that is also correlated through literature. And this relationship is used in our determination. Then there is the natural gas, the methane, which using the heating value of the oil, of the gas, we kind of take into account the heavier components that may be present in it, and thus resulting in slightly higher emissions, and that is factored in. Then there's the fugitive methane component, which is just methane leaking from facilities during flaring or other operational activities. For this, we use the 100-year global warming potential for methane to be a little bit on the conservative side as well. And finally, there's the natural gas liquids, which, as mentioned earlier, is derived from the gas analysis report and simply a molecular weighted average of the individual components and their emission intensity is considered in the calculation. All right, moving on to the next section, which is the permanence. This is really the core of carbon crediting and the offset to make sure that when we do credit and offset some of these emissions, that they actually stay abated. This is something that the nature-based credits often struggle with, and I think this is where the real edge that engineered solutions have, whether it be CO2 sequestration, direct air capture, biochar, or specifically leaving unburned oil and gas resources in the ground, especially the ones that are marginally beneficial to produce. So there's a large section of the protocol focusing on how to document this. Basically, we have decided to focus to kind of put forward the principles of what is to be established in terms of the geologic permanence, but because of the variability of each operation, we largely leave it up to the operator within the parameters of our guidance to establish the best case for their permanence of their retired project. And so this will be in the form of a permanence report that'll be uploaded to the platform and will be verified by the third-party verifier, in this case, Ryder Scott, and to basically establish that when the wells contained within this project are retired, that contains the entire reservoir or the body in communication, the subsurface. So some of the supporting documentation, obviously there would have to be maps, project area wellbore inventory, cross sections to define the subsurface area, wellbore schematics to kind of show the perforations and the completed zones. And then also to kind of establish the fluid dynamics in the subsurface, history matching, and dynamic data such as pressure transient analysis, rate transient analysis, reservoir modeling, whatever it might be. So that is something that either Ryder Scott can help with generating, or with a lot of operators already have such information or analysis in place, just as prudent operators and understanding the reserves they have. Also, a lot of this documentation is based around Class 6 regulatory permits for CCS injection wells, because we're aiming for the similar requirements, basically establishing the permanence of the fluid sequestered and remaining underground. Obviously, in this case, if you just retire the reserves, it's a static reservoir. And so it's much easier to prove up that permanence and make sure that when we do abandon these wells, and those reserves stay where they are. That is a fairly easy case to make, but we want to make sure that it is documented and clear and accessible so that in the future where potential buyers or auditors want to check the credibility of the issued credits, they can log back into the IP interplanetary file system, look which well their credits came from, and look at the justification validation of the permanence and that those things are really still there and that their credit is valid even in the long term. The next element of the permanence is the operational permanence. So obviously the initial execution of the project by plugging and abandoning these wells is a big part of it. Retiring those well bores, plugging it according to local regulatory standards, cleaning up the well site, reclaiming the land. That is all part of that process. And we leave it up to it's basically up to the operator or the project owner to monitor that there's no additional operations while they're performing their land reclamation duties according to the regulation. And this basically means that there's no new permits filed for drilling or developing the reserves that have been claimed for credits. In the future, in the next year and phase of the platform, we'll automate this process so that it'll be automatically referencing the online databases of the local regulators to check for new permit issuance within project boundaries. That way, if there is somebody looking to file a permit that may impede on the project, it is flagged and referenced. And this way we'll be able to monitor it because that's information that is already automatically publicly available and uploaded. So that is easy to track. The final component and the third leg of our permanence guarantee is the legal protections, which can be done either through a declaration of restrictive covenants, which is a contract for the mineral owners to basically sign and forego their right to extract and develop the retired reserves for a minimum of 50 years going forward. And so this is something that can be signed and tied to the mineral ownership contract by either the operator if they own the mineral rights, or if it's a private mineral owner, they can sign it as well. And this is why it's so important for us to create high quality carbon credits and come up with break-even values. And when we do our break-even calculations for the operator, we factor in their working interest as well as royalty interest. So that takes into account a compensation for the mineral owners in proportion to their ownership stake in the mineral resources. So even though they're foregoing that future extraction, they're still compensated for what they would have received through the value of the carbon credits. But we leave those negotiations largely up to the operator, but we're happy to guide those negotiations and discussions as well. The final and kind of catch-all safety net for this is a small buffer account. When we designed our buffer account, we decided to allocate 1% of all generated credits into a universal buffer account. And this is to address any unforeseen reversals that would occur in the future. Looking at kind of the technical capabilities of the projects and the general protocol itself, we think the risk is quite low. And we did this by looking at kind of current documentation out there for the standards for buffer accounts, either from the CCS, the California Air Resource Board, and other standards that are existing in the industry. So we have another question that's popped up. What price forecast is used to determine the economic limit of the well? So for the value of the well itself, we use SEC price determinations, which is the first month of the last 12 months arithmetically averaged together from whenever the project is being initiated, and that determines kind of the economic limit. And then we take all the economics of the well, and when it comes to and then what price for a carbon credit would be required to basically equal the PV10 value of the oil and gas asset. So that is kind of what factors into it. Of course, I mean, we're not going to be targeting just the break-even price for the credits for what we receive on the market. We believe there's a good price expectation for these engineered credits, and it is above kind of what maybe we have seen from the nature-based credits on the international market, which can range from $2 to $7. But what we have seen domestically, much higher prices for US-based projects and high-quality generated carbon credits, which meet the criteria. Hence the focus on these core criteria, which we know will return a higher value to the operators for their projects. Another question, is reserve simulation required for marginal well certification of permanence? It is not required. It is simply a suggestion. We all know that there's certain, with geologically well-defined reservoirs with good boundary conditions, some of our existing projects, they have fault blocks where they have, measured pressure data, and they can clearly demonstrate lack of pressure connectivity with offset fault blocks, or it could be perhaps there's an anticline structure or some other geologic constraint. So reservoir simulation is not required. It is only a suggestion. So it may be that the drainage area is well defined and all the wells within that are plugged. And so there's no question of connectivity to offsetting production, if there is any. So there's simply a suggestion, and we're happy to discuss specifics on a one-on-one or project-specific consultations to perhaps come up with a good narrative for permanence. And the final and key component that really carries the previous one of additionality, permanence, and accuracy. You can have the best project with getting high marks in all three of those, but unless it is transparently documented and accessible to the public, it could be a moot point. And so really having that transparency, immutability, and consistency of execution, I think, is what really sets apart the 06 platform. Part of that is obviously the third-party independent verification, which is so key to all voluntary carbon market credits. And the way we do that is uploading all the documentation that would usually be submitted to any registry, any voluntary carbon market, or any voluntary carbon project in support of the claim for carbon credits. But these get uploaded to our platform, and the core technical documents get verified by the third-party verifiers, and then they get uploaded to the interplanetary file system, as we mentioned earlier. And once they're there, that version is locked in and up there immutably. This means that even if there's an edit or a change to one of the supporting documents, that change will be tracked and visible by future auditors or interested buyers. Once the projects are executed, once the permits are submitted, the wells are plugged and abandoned and signed off by regulators. That is checked on the platform. Those sign-offs are uploaded and checked against the public database. And as a final step, we issue our carbon tokens, which is a ERC 1155, which has two components to it. It has a fungible element, which really tracks the 1 ton CO2 equivalent credit indefinitely. So we avoid double counting. We see exactly where that credit was generated, how it was traced, how it was traded, and where it has ended up, and whether it is still active or whether it has been retired and already claimed for an offset. The additional element to the 1155 token is a non-fungible component, which really tracks the origin of the credit itself, the well location, the date of the execution, link to all the supporting documentation on the IPFS, and all the other requirements that really create to show and demonstrate in a very transparent way that it is a high quality carbon credit and that we really do meet all those standards. One more question. Is having those restrictive covenants not making 06's approach less competitive? It is we don't believe it makes it less competitive, but I mean, it makes it higher quality, which really, I think at this stage in the voluntary carbon market, where we have seen the credibility really hindered by a lot of additionality failures on so many projects across the industry, we believe that additionality is a really key component, and providing that protection, that guarantee to buyers that the reserves that they're potentially purchasing over here, or the emissions that they're offsetting, won't just be brought back online in the next 5 years, 4 years, when the price of oil goes back up, let's say to above $100, that somebody else won't just come in there and drill a new well, which is unlikely to happen since we're mainly targeting marginal wells. And so for a lot of the projects we're looking at and evaluating and moving forward with, this is not really a strong consideration, since these are fields that are in their late life, and there's really very limited reserves remaining in the ground anyway, and wouldn't really make sense to redevelop. So it's really not so much of a surrender for the mineral owners or the operators, but it really does add a very, very high value add to the buyers, as well as the potential price received for the carbon credits themselves. And the declaration of restrictive covenants is simply one mechanism that we've developed and proposed to operators. But really it is or equally binding legal barriers. So in certain cases, there could already be existing regulatory restrictions on new developments for whatever reason, or other barriers. But this is a little bit open-ended, but we do have some mechanisms to prove up that legal protection. But we do think fundamentally it is core to creating these high quality carbon credits and giving buyers that long-term confidence that these will remain high quality going forward. Finally, there's the question of leakage, which is something that we see often come up for oil and gas projects from buyers that really ask good question. And it's, well, how do we know that when we retire this oil and gas well, that somebody else just won't go out there and drill another one? Obviously, on a well by well basis, this is very, very hard to track. And we know that's not how the industry really works. And so we believe that the best way is to really look at it from a fundamental level. We all like fundamental considerations. And it is a fact that it is kind of determined based on simply supply and demand considerations. We know that over the last 15, 20 years, really the focus has been on reducing the demand for hydrocarbons, whether that be through energy efficiency standards, supporting investments for renewable energy, or emission reduction schemes such as in California and in Europe. This has put a downward pressure on the demand. However, by simply doing that, we move down the curve with a consistent supply, which reduces the price. And so unless we have a holistic system in place that forces all players and participants in the market to follow these demand reduction requirements, it'll lower the price of the existing supply, which will then just simply have leakage into those markets where non-participating users will take advantage of lower prices and increase their demand, thus really creating leakage from the demand side. However, if we reduce supply at the same time in a proportionate manner to the demand, then the price stability is maintained based on the supply and demand side, thus minimizing the leakage into non-participating players. And we believe, since we have had so much support on the demand reduction and no support, or the supply side has not been addressed at all, we're basically playing catch up with reducing the supply, starting with the least productive wells. Thus, we get a disproportionate bang for emission reductions while reducing the supply of these reserves, focusing on the most efficient ones, the least emitting ones, and the ones that actually deliver the most value to the market for the least amount of cost. And of course, on all these subjects that I've just gone through, there's more information and more detail in the protocol itself. So I invite you all to go to our website and download it and give it a read if you are more interested, or contact us if you have more specific questions. As I mentioned throughout this description, we really have focused on evaluating and developing a methodology that is consistent with the highest standards out there for the voluntary carbon market. Even though including the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, even though they're still finalizing their methodology, it is a very thorough guidance system, and we're building our platform around that to meet really all those requirements. And that is our focus, to really get validated around that. But also, referencing other existing protocols out there, such as the California Air Resource Board, LCFS requirements, ACR, Vera, Gold Standard. They all have protocols out there for different kinds of carbon offset projects. And so really making sure that the protocol that we have developed is consistent in principle and fundamental nature with all of these protocols and methodologies that are already out there and accepted by the market. So where are we currently with the 06 methodology? We launched this. The 06 is a fairly new company. We launched last year. And so we secured, and key partnerships were first to be secured as really kind of the verifiers of the carbon credit, since we needed to know what the standard requirements would be. So we've secured the partnership with Ryder Scott to help develop this methodology, but also to act as independent verifiers of the submitted projects. We've assembled an amazing team, part of which you had a pleasure of meeting today, including Sam and Hoos. And so we have experts both in the oil and gas with a long history, as well as blockchain experts, an executive leadership team with an amazing network in the industry. We launched our brand last November. Some of you may have noticed that. We launched the MVP of our platform this past January, and we're finalizing a technology audit report to make sure that everything is really bulletproof and secure on the platform itself. We've finalized the protocol that you are reviewing now, that we've just gone through, and really also finalizing our partnership for creating ratings for the submitted projects through B0, which is a key consideration for a lot of buyers, and another benchmark to really create high quality carbon credits that will that'll command a premium price and value in the market. We've also been onboarding pilot projects, which we have secured. The test projects and the execution is currently scheduled for sometime this summer, maybe July. And we're targeting finally first sales on our platform going live this August in 2023. And that is when the first credits will be minted and enter the market. And we're very excited about that and really excited to have you guys join us on this journey. And I'm here to answer any additional questions. And so thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that presentation, Andre. We have some more questions in the box open here.
All right.
See if I can bring you to me so you can see them as well.
Perfect. All right. So another question. Can you please confirm that carbon credits can be generated by PDP, PDSI, PDPP? What about PUDs? So as I mentioned in the additionality section, currently we're really, since this is such a new technology and we really want to make the voluntary carbon market comfortable with this premise of retiring oil and gas and really giving value for abating those emissions before they even enter the value chain. We feel the most confident about selling to non-industry buyers that develop producing and perhaps even proved shut-in, but developed reserves with an easy access to be delivered to the market and result in emissions are the easiest and highest quality to deliver and sell as additional. We're not currently giving credit for proved undeveloped because there's a significant barrier for those emissions to enter the market. That is not to say that is not something that we will not be pursuing going forward once the market is tested and established, and we can create that narrative and create a good case for that additionality amongst the buyers and the general public. Next question. So just to be clear, you have no allowance for leakage, correct? That is correct. We don't believe that there's right now that there's any need to include the leakage in this methodology. That is correct. Based on the macroeconomic justification that I went through. However, we're also very conservative and quite conservative in our valuations, such as the carbon intensity of the reserves being credited. If you look at existing methodologies, they often include project-specific emissions, which include like operational emissions as well. So we don't believe that giving additional discounts for leakage is really necessary at this moment. Can you compare and contrast direct carbon storage tax credits versus your token? So carbon credit tax storage, those are obviously government issued for very specific projects. And through the voluntary market, you get direct compensation, not just tax credits for the credits being issued. And so this creates a little bit more dynamicity for that, and you have multiple buyers, and the price is not fixed by a central regulatory agency, and thus is also a little bit more open-ended to what projects can be can be qualify for these credits. Next is, it appears that there may be a glut of voluntary carbon credits on the market with posted prices coming down rather rapidly this year. Can you speak to the buyer market at this point? So currently, obviously the voluntary carbon market this year has been discredited a little bit through information coming out about the lack of transparency and the low standards, or perhaps not as transparent or as strict standards by the projects that were brought online 10 years ago or over the last couple of decades. And that is something that we're trying to address over here. And like any market, there may be some fluctuations in supply and demand, but supply has gone up drastically over the last 2 years, but largely through forestry projects. And so the market suggests that they are in search for higher quality credits, which includes these engineered solutions such as ours. So we believe that credits coming from a platform such as the 06 will not be in direct competition with the general, what we consider lower quality credits, which are currently swamping the market. Are the costs to P&A the well also considered, or just their reserves and economics? So this is a factor in the break-even price that we determine upon looking at specific projects, and we most certainly do consider the P&A costs. because obviously that is the biggest cost in executing these projects. In a normal PV10 evaluation of an oil and gas project, operators try to defer the P&A liability as long as possible and hence discount it. But obviously, if to execute this project, that cost is front-loaded to the immediate or near future. So yes, we definitely do consider it in determining the break-even prices. And even with this consideration, we find that the break-even prices are quite competitive with what we expect to receive for these credits on the open market. Oh, it's a long one. How do you account for internal leakage? If you remove my asset retirement obligation, I imagine I would use those new available resources to rework or increase production on another well. This is not the reason why I couldn't accredit this.
I think this is, Sam, in our back channel, Sam Holroyd also had some additions on leakage. So maybe Sam, if you want to take a question and also your addition, if you don't mind, Andre.
I'll go for it.
Surely. Yeah, thank you, Guus. Andre, great work. I thought I might just maybe provide a little bit of additional background on leakage. So in the marketplace, we think about two separate types of leakage here. We think about the market leakage, which is, I think, what this question might be getting to, but there's also the operational leakage. As required by many of the registries, there is operational leakage addressed within the 06 protocol, and that is accounted for within our buffer account. So we do reserve a small portion at this time, 1% on most of the projects we've looked at is considered a buffer account, and that is a leakage, if you will, an operational leakage consideration. Those credits would be attributable to the operational leakage. Market leakage is something that is quite of a broad question, and the voluntary carbon market is addressing that in a variety of ways. Some of those have to do with pricing, some of those have to do with the buyer-seller relationships. To maybe cover one of the other questions here, that the owner of those credits is the generator of the credits, the project owner. So you will own those credits and you would sell those credits on your own. And so when it comes to the market leakage, reassigning those values and those investments to more oil and gas development is truly a relationship that you would have to address, but directly between yourself and the buyers. Guus, I'll turn it back over to you. Oh.
Yep. No, that's a very good point, Sam. And so that is also something we haven't really addressed here, is really kind of the co-benefits of these projects, which is something that's also going to be captured in the non-fungible part of the token that is issued. And that is something that can really play a big part in playing helping the narrative of the credits, which is something that drives really the price received among buyers as well. They really want to feel good about the carbon offset impact that they're having with their investment. And we feel that kind of cleaning up older oil and gas production facilities, that may be having some leakage issues, or just simply having older facilities on landowners' surfaces or in natural environments. That is a very positive story to tell. If you go from an oil and gas operation, even if it is operated cleanly, to simply back to its natural state, that is a great thing to show, especially if there is improvements in cleaning up any soil contamination, air quality contamination, elimination of the methane leaks, water quality, etc. And so this perhaps use of funds is also something that is really a consideration, and ultimately as a co-benefit to what buyers may look at. So some of our pilot projects, obviously they have other operations that they're focusing on, whether it be conversion to CCS or efficiency improvements or other alternative energy sources. And so if this is something that is the use of funds that can be documented as a co-benefit, that'll command a better price for the carbon credits themselves amongst the buyers.
Right. Thanks, Andre. And then I think we have some questions on the demand side, and in the back channel, we're also communicating with our CEO, and he's very happy to take those. So I would also like to introduce Martijn Dekker, who is our CEO. And maybe the first question for you, Martijn, is does the operator sell the credits, or does Series 6 sell the credits? And whether we have sold any credits and what the price will be.
Yeah, great. Thanks, and thanks for all attending, and happy to answer that. So I think Sam already mentioned is that as an operator who's creating these carbon credits, I mean, the credits are yours and you can do with it whatever you want. You can sell them, you can keep them, you can retire them. As Andre mentioned, the first credits are to be minted in the summer in like July or August. So at this point, we haven't sold any credits yet. And that'll be actually a key point to establish the pricing point as well. As Andre mentioned, actually, although the global carbon, voluntary carbon market is taking a little bit of hit because of the bad publicity on particular nature-based solutions in the beginning of the year, pricing for carbon credits from America is pretty strong. And I think the last report I saw as far as like international market is around $5 per ton of CO2 on a variety of projects, regardless of quality. In the US, it's more like $25 per ton, again, regardless of quality or the type of project. So I think that's kind of on the selling the credits. In terms of the model for buyers and suppliers of carbon credits, is we only charge like a nominal fee to get to make use of the platform. So there's not a lot of upfront cost. And as a supplier of carbon credits, basically you get compensated as we get compensated, because we just get compensated as part of the carbon credits. So that's actually not any money out of your pocket. And I think for buyers, they can either buy directly on our platform, or you can bring your own buyer and you can take the credits off our platform and sell them to whoever you want, or work with any brokerage or platform you're already working with.
Great, thanks a lot, Martijn, for answering that. Maybe two more questions that are appropriate for you to answer as well, which we probably can take together. So the compensation of Series 6, and then we have a question about the Series 6 revenue model, and where the Series 6 platform adds to the cost to either producers, buyers, or other participants.
Yeah, I think I kind of answered that. Is like the way we really compensate it is by retaining part of the created carbon credits. At the moment, 15% of all carbon credits created we retain as compensation, and that only happens when the carbon credits are minted. So there's no cost to producers or buyers ahead of time. And to use the platform, there's a nominal fee, and actually what we've done, we've basically set the fee on the size of your production. So if you've got a big operation, you pay a little bit more, and if you got a small operations, you pay a little bit less to make it accessible for all shape and forms of producers.
Great, thanks a lot, Martijn, for the clarification. Then I think there's some questions to you, Andre. I think maybe, let's see, we have a question on the ACR methodology.
So it is comparable, not directly comparable, but in terms of the requirements and standards, yes. And I would say even more so in certain elements. But I can also take this question over here on the scope 1 emissions for the workovers and refracts. That's a very good question. And that's not really, since we're not really directly accounting for operational emissions right now due to the complexity of those that I mentioned earlier, it is definitely something that we will be implementing in the future. However, with offsetting a workover or refract operational emissions that might have happened, that's something that's perhaps like behind pipe reserves or currently shut-in reserves. So I think giving credit for the remaining reserves that would have been produced as a result of that workover or refract. So that's a positive. And I don't think right now we would be crediting the workover execution emissions or operational emissions or the refract ones, just because that is kind of outside the scope of our current protocol. But in the future, that is something that we may definitely consider and factor in as we become inclusive of all emissions.
Great, thanks. I think the majority of the questions here are also right in your alley, Andre. So feel free to take any that you want or refer them.
Okay, I think a buffer pool of 1% of a forestry protocol is supposed to account for impermanence, reversals, risk, control leakage, and uncertainty. What formula was used to determine the this low of a number? So it was really consideration of the risks across the potential reversal risks across the projects, and similarly, like the considerations whether it was things that could have, whether it be a leakage up from a abandoned well, whether it be seismic activity, whether it be somebody coming in there and redeveloping them. So we looked at each of these risks and the likelihood of them and the potential impact. And so the one thing about oil and gas operations, even actively trying to produce the reserves results in a fairly low depletion rate. If we know anything about oil and gas projects that take many, many decades to extract the reserves. So we know that the rate of leakage, should any occur, would be very slow. But also, if a well is properly abandoned according to local regulations, we know that the leakage around those is extremely low. And so that is a very low probability risk as well. And with the legal protections and other protections and accreditations of that permanence that we've required for projects that go through our protocol, we think we've addressed a lot of those risks that might potentially result in a reversal. Thus kind of looking at the risks that were presented. And for example, I mean, if the forestry project protocol is mentioned, there's a lot more forest fires around than there is open leakage from existing reservoirs. So it's understandable that it would be significantly less than that. So, and to be fair, it was more of a comprehensive qualitative assessment of risk and the impact than a specific empirical equation, perhaps like for the carbon emissions themselves. But happy to go into details, perhaps maybe a subject of a future article.
Yeah, Andre, Sam here. I just wanted to maybe build on your comments there for that buffer account presumption. So we went through quite a bit of assessment against some frameworks around defining risks and how those risks are considered in each of the different types of carbon credits. And I think the key consideration for this particular protocol is really embodied in the fact that the oil and gas market is a mature and highly regulated marketplace. And with respect to the abandonment of operations, highly regulated on the way those operations are conducted and the operating environment and the filing of paperwork that must be approved, all of which has to be followed to generate carbon credits on the 06 platform. And so I think when we looked at following the existing regulations, that was a key component as to the limit and the amount of operational risk that would be associated with any extension of the buffer account. And on a case-by-case basis, we would obviously look at that and see if there were reasons for extending that as needed.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam, for that addition. So I see one question on whether we as 06 anticipate that tokens would sell at different prices based on the non-fungible elements of the tokens. And we can confirm that that is indeed the case. So we do see that one distinguishing element of the 06 solution is that each carbon credit can be individually recognized and also sold at different price points. And we estimate that the local for local element might be important in this. So for example, somebody in a business in Houston might want to exclusively use carbon credits based from Houston. So then we have another question, which I think is to you, Andre. I don't think we got to that one yet. Out-of-pocket costs for the evaluation of their assets.
So this is something that I think, again, makes the digitization of the protocols fairly unique and is something that will be a valuable tool in the credit markets going forward, is that it lowers the cost to entry of projects by allowing the operators to really do a lot of the evaluation themselves if they have that internal information already. So it's really about generating the sufficient standard of reporting, whether it be so it's the cost of doing a third-party reserve report that is priced out of pocket, but in terms of doing the permanence, that is up to the operator to come up with themselves or hire the relevant engineers that have that knowledge and technical capability to create a high quality reserve permanence report. As for the third-party assessment or verification, that is something that is based on like a flat registration basis. So for an operator to register on our platform, there is a small sign-up fee, and we really disconnect that cost from the ultimate result because we want to maintain that independence. And so tying the verification to an outcome is something that is that would invalidate that result in a certain way. So the cost can be scaled with the size of the project, perhaps, and the number of wells, but that is the only cost that's really associated around that. And of course, at this point, we're hoping to fully automate the platform, but right now, while we're still getting operators familiar with it, we're happy to do initial kind of consultations and help validate individual projects kind of on a high-level basis to help screen those for the operators that might be interested in pursuing specific ones.
So there's one more question, Andre, and then I think we answered all of them. But I would also, if we missed any of your questions, please answer them in the chat. We have one more minute left to get to those. But there's one more question on the utilization of third-party engineers. So maybe Andre, you can answer that question.
So any valid third-party reserve report is valid and can be considered as long as it is a licensed engineer, or actually the engineer meets the SEC requirements for a accredited individual to be making such determinations. And that is something that'll be part of the review process by Ryder Scott. So Ryder Scott is only doing the verification of the third-party reserve and this report and the supporting documentation, but the actual report itself can be issued by any accredited individual or organization.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Andre and Sam, for answering these questions. I don't know if you have any last additions before we get to the practical things.
Oh, thank you everybody for your questions and for your time and participation in this great walkthrough of the protocol. Happy to introduce it to you guys and looking forward to the additional feedback.
Yeah, fully agree, Andre. And thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it was very insightful. Thanks to the audience for all your questions. I see there's one more question coming in, which we cannot get to now, but we'll make sure to include that in the mirror board and answer the question. Like my colleague Stephen mentioned earlier, we will share the recording of this session and a PDF of the mirror board on your email, the email you used for registration. And you can always contact us through our email address, which you can find on our website. It's info@06.co. Yeah, and I think we covered everything. Thanks a lot for attending. Feel free to, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Andre. You can see our email address there as well. Thanks a lot for attending, and we'd be happy to chat with you further if you have any questions or interest to go further and explore this with us. And we'd of course be happy to have an email conversation with you or jump on a call to discuss further. So thanks a lot. Anything else, Andre, Sam, before we wrap up?
Nope, just a big thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for attending, and we hope to speak to you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks.